So I thought I'd start with a story about my dad, since our other speaker talked about his dad. My dad also passed away at late in life, a few years ago, and he was one of these people who had more income as a senior than he ever did as a working person. He was just a hard-working guy who wasn't afraid of the RSPs when they first came on the scene, and he followed the budgeting plan and put all his money into savings. And when he retired, he had way more money coming in and therefore way more tax to pay than he ever did as a worker, and he had a hard time understanding that too. But the fact of the matter is, in the 27 years that I've been in practice, working primarily within the arts and entertainment community, although I let a few lawyers and doctors come so they can pay bills. I don't discriminate, in other words. The vast majority of my clients couldn't follow that path, even if they had it in their mind that they wanted to follow that path, because their income was never stable enough. It was never the same amount. Their expenses were never stable enough. And a lot of the people that I know didn't even live in the same place for a long period of time. They were all over the place. In my practice, I get to know a lot of people who would love to live that kind of life, but can't. And certainly can't by the time they get to be seniors. So what do you do then? Well, my approach to things, in fact, the only thing I really know about is not investing, but is income tax. So my business is to help people save income taxes or pay less tax. And I guess I'm familiar with people in the world of the arts in a way that a lot of accountants aren't. I'm familiar with clients who live primarily on grants, people who live with income from royalties, all of which can have various different kinds of tax treatments. I was thinking that I might like to start by opening it up to some specific questions, because if I could get an idea of where your specific interests are or questions are, then I'd be able to better gear it. And then if nobody asks something, I'll talk about what interests me. Lindy's saying she has income from two sources. One is employment and the other is self-employment. And you might have income from many other sources too. And all of them get reported on the same tax return, unless you happen to be making enough income that you choose to incorporate a company, in which case you have to file corporate taxes. But I guess it's possible that some accountants wouldn't be familiar with that, but it's not that uncommon.
What do you claim like expenses?
Well, the thing is, if you're a self-employed person, the law says a self-employed person can claim any expense that you reasonably incur to earn your income. So then the $50,000 question is, what's reasonable? And that's up for grabs every year. And that's really the reason you hire an accountant, is because you don't want to spend all your time reading about what is perceived to be reasonable these days and what isn't. But for an employed person, and there are many people who work in both film and theater who are able to claim expenses when they're employed. In particular, people in the film business, they cracked down about 20 years ago and made everybody who worked in film either be an employee or they had to have an incorporated company. But those who are employees, and this includes people who are not just the creative people on the set, but also the technicians and the stage managers and the producers and the go-to people, even as employees, if your employer is willing to give you a form that says they require you to have certain expenses in order to perform your job, like maybe they don't provide you an office space and require you to work from home, or perhaps they require you to provide your own tools or use a cell phone. That's the most common thing in the film business, is people who are running from location to location need cell phones. So there's a form an employer can fill out, and that will allow you to claim expenses as an employee, and it doesn't prevent you from claiming other expenses from your self-employed income, and I see lots of people in that situation.
Yes.
So you can get it, you can claim everything one way or another.
It happened to me once in the theater company, totally screwed it up. They had no idea how to fill out the form.
Well, yeah, that employers don't know what to do is a whole other story, but you can either you need to be knowledgeable yourself, or you need to be working with a professional who's knowledgeable enough. And I've also had lots of chats with people's employers, including I have a client who is an instrument repair person, and he also builds bows for violins and cellos, and his employer was filling out his T4 slip incorrectly. I mean, it's the most basic tax form there is. The company's been in business for 1,000,000 years, and they didn't know how to fill out T4 slips. So everybody gets to learn at some point. Anybody else?
Last time we had a question about U.S. income.
Well, that actually brings me to another thought. So U.S. income, if you're self-employed and have U.S. income, it gets reported on your Canadian return, just like any other income. Depending on the amount of the U.S. income, you might run into an issue where they want to withhold taxes if you're going to the U.S. to work. And there are a few ways you can handle that. There are some forms you can fill out that will allow them to either reduce or eliminate the tax, and it proves that you're a working professional in Canada and you're paying tax here. If you do have the tax withheld, which I know lots of clients who decide to just go ahead and have the tax withheld because they don't want to go through the bother of the paperwork, there you get credit here for the tax that you paid there. You don't need to necessarily fill out a tax return in the U.S. unless you are a resident in the U.S. For some part of time, or unless you're a U.S. citizen. But another thing that occurred to me is I do have a number of clients who earned income on a regular basis in the U.S. over time, both all different kinds of performing artists, like dancers and theater people and musicians, who are collecting pensions now from the various agencies in the U.S. And some of them had to go and discover that they had pension funds there themselves. And I don't know a huge amount about it, but I know that there's money there for people who work for any significant period of time, and there are ways of finding out and applying for it. Yeah.
As I understand it, I did live and work in the U.S. for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
That my contributions to Social Security that were deducted in the instances when I was an employee, my question is, can they be applied to my CPP?
They have nothing to do with CPP, but you can. You're eligible. I don't know what the U.S. minimum is, but I'm almost positive 10 years more than meets their minimum. You should be able to collect Social Security.
Even though I have a green card.
Yeah, it doesn't matter whether you're a citizen, whether you have a green card. If you paid into the U.S. Social Security system for enough years to meet their minimum, then you should be eligible to collect U.S. Social Security.
But what about what if it's not enough, but it's a substantial amount? It still cannot be, because they sent me a statement of my contribution for a number of years.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure 10 years would be enough to collect something.
And you continue to collect through the years to come.
You might get a very small Social Security payment, but it gets U.S. Social Security collected by Canadian residents gets very favorable tax treatment.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm the only one here who was getting a monthly payment from American Actors Equity because of having worked on Canadian Actors Equity before Canadian Actors Equity exists. But the U.S. Actors Equity has to take off 15% before they send it to you.
Yeah.
And when I tried to claim back that money that had been withheld by the American government on my own income tax, and I had a huge upsell tax, I had 15% there and another whatever percentage I have now on that.
Were you doing your own tax return?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. So what happens is the Canadian government's gotten stickier about it. You used to be able to just ignore the U.S., claim that the 15% you paid and take it as a tax credit in Canada. Nowadays, they question it a lot, and they ask you instead to file a U.S. return, and the income is probably not enough to pay tax in the U.S., so then you get it all back.
You have to file the American.
If the Canadian government requires it, you do. Sometimes it works that they give you the foreign tax credit, and sometimes it doesn't.
And my accountant got messages from the government back and forth for like 2 years on this thing.
And I don't know who you're working with. Because I work with a lot of people in this situation, we run into it all the time. So I can tell you 6 months ago it was handled one way and now they're doing this. And I scratch my head as much as anybody does. Yeah. Yes.
I use QuickTax.
Yeah.
For my taxes. And I did not find any place on there that said agent's commission as an expense. In any kind of category, whether it's active or not. And so I called them and said where to put it. And they said, well, down here under other. But I was astonished that there's no line in the tax form for that kind of thing.
Right. So the question is, what do you do about agent's commission? There is no line for it on the tax return. You put it under other.
Okay.
Regardless of what program you're using. If you were in a professional business, it goes under other. If you were in a different kind of business, selling manufactured goods and paying somebody a commission that way, there would be a line for it. Why isn't there a line? Probably because there are fewer artists claiming commissions than there are manufacturing companies. Yeah.
This is probably register my company, but I was told two different things, and I don't know what's going to. I was told that generally, on the line where you can claim food and entertainment, okay, you can claim 50%. And then I was told if you're a certain number of kilometers away from your base, and like if I'm in Vancouver for 6 months, or if I'm in Australia for 10 months, then you can claim 100%.
Okay, you can never claim 100% of food and entertainment. You can claim the tax claim is 50%. There's, I think, a 60% claim if you're a long-haul truck driver. I don't think working in Petrolia counts for that. Not even if you carpool. No. I did have a case once where we claimed the actual 50% of the actual food and entertainment costs for a performer who was on tour. This particular performer had received a grant from the government to run the tour with, and the grant stipulated in it what it would cover, including daily per diem costs of X number of dollars, which in general you're not permitted to claim 100% of something. So and this guy happened to be audited, and it's the only time in 27 years I've seen this happen, but they allowed him 100% of his food and entertainment, not because he was far from home, but because the grant that he got, that was the taxable income supporting the expenses, stipulated that it was covering these expenses. Yeah, but I've only ever seen that happen once. So. Right. But that was a good question. And I know that there's a sort of common misconception that a lot of touring artists have, that they can have a daily claim a daily amount of whatever that's supposed to represent their costs away from home, and that's not true either. At the back there.
There's this agreement between the American and Canadian tax policies, right?
Yes.
And when I file an American tax, they send the appropriate information to the Canadian.
Not that translucently, but.
No, but eventually that's what does happen. Is it the same reciprocal agreement between Canada and Great Britain?
So in both cases, the question is, what kind of agreements are there between the governments in Britain, Canada, and the U.S.? In both cases, the Canadian government has a tax treaty with Britain and the U.S. and with many other countries that stipulate, that you shouldn't be doubly taxed, so your situation should be addressed. And they get into a lot of other details. At the moment, the governments are not actually, it's not that they're sending your tax return to the Canadian government. It's actually the financial institutions that are sending information to the government, and the governments are cooperating in terms of exchanging that information, hopefully to keep people from avoiding taxes. And the U.S. is much more aggressive about it than Britain. Britain has the right to do it, but has not yet done it as far as I know. That sounded fun.
Can I just say something? I'm very much suffering from tax slavery, and probably because of the starting eating, because we don't want to look back what kind of a year we had. I discovered Zoe about, I don't know how many years ago.
I don't know. I'm too old to remember.
But she brings me great peace of mind.
I promise this wasn't a marketing ploy. I had no idea she'd be here. But it's proof that I have artists who are clients, right?
Honestly.
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
Do you have visual artists as clients?
Yes, many.
Okay, so discuss just briefly the implications if they value their inventory at zero in terms of estate planning.
Okay, so this is a big issue. How many visual artists are there here? Okay, enough to make it worthwhile. So in general, visual artists make very little money unless you're one of a handful of people who've been successful. And the government has long allowed visual artists to value their inventory at zero, that is, claim all the costs of producing the material in the year that you produce the material, and then report the income from the sales when the sales are made. That is helpful during a person's lifetime, especially if they're struggling, because you don't want to pay a lot of tax early on, and when you do make a big sale, if you do, you can use it to pay off debts, and you theoretically have the money to pay the taxes. For the most part, this works for most people. It's an issue if you are a high-earning visual artist who passes away and leaves a large quantity of inventory, of which I do have a number of clients. including my assistant who's been with me for almost 10 years, her dad was a well-known Canadian painter who passed away last couple years ago. And they're going through this very same thing, taking inventory of all of the works. And it's... what happens is it becomes another business, basically, posthumously, and somebody runs the estate, and there can be significant taxes payable on it. And the main thing is that if you do have a large stock of inventory and you're elderly, or even if you're not elderly, but for some reason you're ill, or you know, don't imagine life is going to go on too long, you may not want to keep the large inventory. You may want to gift it. I know a lot of people are giving things to universities and the Canadian archives because that will prevent the big tax hit if you did nothing with your inventory, which could theoretically be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions. On the day you die, your executor has to have a tax return prepared that values that inventory and pays tax on it. Yeah.
I have a question. As an artist who sells virtually nothing,
yeah.
What I do sell is very modest in price. I have no idea what the value of my work is.
Well,
so I estimating it.
You can't die.
Die out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can't die either. Don't worry.
So it's a conundrum because I'm thinking, I have no idea what to do with it. I don't want to burn it, destroy it.
Right.
But I don't see a logical way out of it. To me, it's a conundrum. I don't know what to do.
I think it is a conundrum. And I think that it's like the story about my dad. There are some people that fit into a neat package where they can follow step A, B, C because their life happens to work like A, B, and C. For the rest of us, me included, it's a one-by-one individual basis.
And so a couple of comments. Presumably, the estate could attempt to claim the fair market value is a very small amount.
Yes.
Given the history, for example, of only intermittent sales.
In this fellow's case, that's possible.
Is there any other way that you could establish something like a trust, for example, and transfer the works to a trust?
Well,
or any other creative mechanism of that sort, particularly for the more well-known, more successful?
Right. The best known, most successful artists do set up trusts prior to, at some point during their later life. They don't even have to be on death's doorstep to do this. They may want to do it as part of a larger tax planning process. And there are people in the city specifically, I think one of my clients actually does the valuations of the work. And whose opinion is, it's always been interesting to me, whose opinion counts with the tax department when you're doing these values? Well, there are art dealers who are business people. There are gallery owners who are considered legitimate. They really are. And there are people, in fact, the woman that I'm thinking of is an artist herself, but has done a lot of arts administration. And she has started a small business that goes and values people's works and advises them on what they should and shouldn't do. So, but like it's individual by individual, and I would say if you are a well-known, high-income earning artist whose work is still selling and going up in value, that you need the team, you need the estate planner and the lawyer and somebody to help you set the whole thing up. And I work a little bit below that, but I have all the names to refer people to who, if your work starts selling for millions of dollars, I'll send you to the right person. Yeah, yes.
This is sort of a broad question. When we get to a certain age, the opportunities for work diminished. But now, because everybody's staying a lot healthier, you go to an audition, and I'm speaking of performing arts.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, you find that you're in a catapult. Because there's so doggone many people who are still fit and healthy, the competition is terrific. Now, if you're basically on pension because you paid into it and you're entitled to it, you're of that age, but you're not retired, certainly not in your brain, but you're not earning any income necessarily because of the competition, the contracts don't come up. You might get a $50 return for a callback or something.
Yeah.
Well, you declare that. You may get residuals from 25 years ago to $2.73. So
I've seen those checks. Well, I've seen the check stubs. I don't keep the checks.
When you're not retired, you still have a computer, you're still accessing information, you're still staying in touch with producers, directors, your actor friends.
You're still in business.
You're still in business, but if you don't show income, you can't claim expenses, which you are actually taking out of your retirement.
You know, you can't. I don't think it's correct to say you can't claim the expenses. I'm assuming since you're standing, most people have heard that.
I was told if you claim expenses and don't show income, the income tax department will say you are not self-employed and you are not a profession, you are a hobbyist.
Well,
that's what they do.
That is a possibility. However, it's unlikely to happen. It's highly unlikely to happen to somebody who's got a life body of work, who's proven already over and over again that they are, in fact, a working artist. And the fact of the matter is, it's the tax department, while they do still audit artists, have a different view of the arts than they do for other businesses like manufacturing or no, they definitely do. So, you know, there's also, I keep reading, every year I read, somebody writes an article in the paper that says if you're starting a business, you can claim expenses with no income for 3 years, but not longer than that. But that is not a rule. Nobody wrote that. It's not the law. It all is based on what's reasonable. And the reason people started talking about, can you claim expenses without income, will the tax department allow it, is that there's this concept called, you have to have a reasonable expectation of a profit. In Canada, in the arts, the unfortunate truth is they had to get rid of that, because there isn't a reasonable expectation of a profit for the majority of artists. That's why we have the Canada Council and the Ontario Arts Council and the Toronto Arts Council and all the other funding agencies. So it's a good, you know, you're right. The tax department could be tough, but they haven't been yet, and they haven't shown even a hint of moving in that direction towards artists. On the other hand, if you're making money and have an HST, GST number, you better do that accounting correctly, because they do crack down on that.
Well, you weren't making $40,000 a year at least when they established GST. You don't have a number anyway.
One would only hope, but I know a lot of people who do.
But now it went into effect. It said reasonable expectation of making a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
I said, why not? Because my income has been so minimal,
Yeah.
I contacted them with the idea of deciding no longer to deal with that. They
Yeah.
told me no. You've been doing this for years. You continue to do it.
No, that's bad advice.
Well,
That's bad advice. If you have a GST number and you've been filling out the forms and reporting it, and you wish to deregister, it's called deregistering. If your income, your gross income from business, from self-employment, is $30,000 or less for 1 year, and you show an income tax return that shows less than $30,000 of income from business, you can then deregister your number.
And that can be done with the telephone. In my case,
Yeah, so it could be something as simple as you didn't phrase it in a way that the person on the other end of the phone understood. Or it could be you got a person on the other end of the phone who didn't know what they were doing.
Is that still
No.
It happens all the time. You would think I had a special hotline number, but here's our tactic. If you don't like the answer you get the first time, call another 3 times and see what they say.
3 different answers. No, but remember who gave you the answer.
Oh, no, they don't give you their names.
No. I was very reluctant to pursue it because I'll have no proof. Just saying.
Oh, yeah, you can't pursue it. But you know what? I can tell you after, or you can Google it, how to deregister for GST, and there's a form you fill out, and you can probably also call them and say you want to deregister. And you want the jargon is you want to tell them you're a small supplier and your income is under $30,000 and you would like to deregister. None. Well, the rule is once you hit $30,000 in any 4 calendar quarters, you have to get a GST number. So when you deregister, all they really do is turn a switch off. So if you happen to make a bunch of money 2 years later, you call them up and switch it back on.
And it's the same number. You don't get
Same number. They don't give you a new one. They don't give your number to anyone else. Yeah.
So it's not a good idea then, if you're not...
Well, in general, if your income is low, I think it's a great idea because it's a big pain in the butt to do the accounting for it if you don't need to. And there really is... Yes.
I disagree with you there. I do not have a head for that sort of stuff. That being forced to make the quarterly statements
Yes.
meant that at tax time I had done most of my financial work. So my accountant is happy. He doesn't have to wait. So
Oh, I know your accountant's happy, but, there was something... When I was starting out, I remember a teacher saying to me, how do you tell somebody what month their corporate year-end should be? And if the answer you give them is, well, May is the most convenient for me, the accountant, then you're not a good accountant. So, it has advantages, but so does budgeting. You could do the same thing without paying the money to the government. And now you've got the discipline for it. You don't have to collect or file returns. GST returns. You still have to do tax returns.
All right. Is there any final question? 1 or 2 more questions? If not, perhaps some closing comments.
Last minute advice? File your taxes on time. That's the single most important bit of advice you can get, because no matter what, like if you owe a lot of money and you're nervous because you don't have it, if you file your tax return on time, even if you don't pay it, you save yourself money because you're not penalized. So file your taxes, do it on time, and get good advice. And not that I'm trying to sell my services in particular, because we're already really busy, but I am the kind of person who, if you use QuickTax, and somebody came to me this year and said, I've been doing my own taxes using QuickTax, I wonder if you'd have a look over it and tell me if I should or shouldn't be doing something. And I have very little ego about this. So in her case, instead of charging her for a tax return, I charged her for a consultation, and she was doing a great job. She didn't need me. And another person will need me. I'm one of the few remaining.
All right. Well, thank you very much, sir.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Zoe, and thank you again to Ben. So we do have some refreshments over here, and I'm sure that each of them would be available for a few minutes if you have some more questions to ask. The next seminar is next week, and we're going to be talking a little bit about estates and legacy. All right. Thank you very much.